Can we go to our next, please?
Sheila Smith. What's the panel's view on censorship on campus? For example, the banning of speakers such as Damian Green.
This has become quite an issue because not only Damian Green, but Peter Tatchell more recently, because he was no platformed for his stance in which he said, amongst other things, you don't have to agree with views that are being silenced to find these tactics illiberal and undemocratic. This prompted the National Union of Students LGBT representative Fran Cowling to pull out of an event because Peter Tatchell was to have been on the platform with her. Emily Thornberry.
I have to say this issue concerns me a great deal. I think that we have very strong laws about what people can say and what they can't. And I think that so long as people are saying things within the law, they should be allowed to express themselves. And I find it particularly concerning at universities. Surely the thing to do, if people have views that you don't agree with, is to challenge them. And I would hope, and I would expect young minds to be challenged by this and to be able to stand up to them and to argue. This is what university is about. And it seems to me that it is wrong to only have panels of people who have one view and don't have views that challenge you. Yes, there are certain people who should not be given a platform, and they would be people who would be attempting to incite violence or to incite racism. There are laws about that. Don't allow them on. But for heaven's sake, don't be afraid of ideas.
Why do you think? Why do you think it is happening? It is regarded as almost a wave, not only in this country, in the United States as well, and elsewhere in Europe. What is happening to explain this for those who live in a liberal democracy with highly educated young people making these decisions? They must feel very strongly, or they don't recognise, from your perspective, the value of freedom of speech, free debate, free argument? Well, sorry, just briefly with Emily on that, and then I'll bring you in, John.
I think perhaps it's something to do with young people in particular wanting to belong to certain groups and wanting to belong to certain friendship groups and being identified with certain groups. And I think that those groups can be pushed in the wrong direction. And sometimes people are afraid to stand up and say, I'm a feminist, but I don't agree with this.
What's your view, John?
Well,
John
I think this is a bit of a throwback to the sort of political correctness that we've had over the last few decades. I think there is a huge amount of group pressure sometimes to conform to, what people think. But I think this can shade over, if you're not very careful, into real illiberalism, which I think is really exactly the wrong way to go. But I can remember from my own experience of what the political correctness was like 20 or 30 years ago in London in particular, when all sorts of really awful things were going on and nobody felt they were able to raise these as serious issues that needed investigation because of the sensitivities involved.
What kind of things are you talking about?
Some of the abuses that you've read about in the papers just recently. There was certainly quite a lot of that going on all over the country, not just in London. Rochdale, elsewhere, where people felt really frightened about speaking out because of political correctness. And I think that you've got something of the same sort of effect taking place at universities now. And I think it's very dangerous. I think that people should be able to speak out. Obviously, as Emily rightly says, you've got to have some limits on what people can say and do. But I think you should push as far as possible towards having people allowed to say whatever they want, to express different views, to be controversial, and to upset people if necessary, because that's the way that a liberal democracy ought to work.
Damian Green.
Let's all agree for a start that anyone who preaches or advocates hatred, violence, racism, that kind of thing, we pass laws to stop that kind of thing. They perhaps shouldn't be allowed to do that, and if they say those sorts of things, they should be prosecuted under the law. Otherwise, let's live in a democracy. I'm really shocked, particularly that young people, and even more particularly, it appears to be young people at universities who are trying to impose this censorship. And I think that the root of it is this extraordinary feeling that he is saying or she is saying something that disturbs me, and I have the right not to be disturbed or made uncomfortable. No, you don't. Not if you live in an advanced society. In fact, being made to feel uncomfortable, being disturbed by what people say, is actually the root of learning and growing. If nobody ever tells you anything that you think you disagree with, then you'll never make your mind up about anything. Other people have imposed their mind on you. And the most depressing thing is that people demand a safe space. The safe space for ideas is living in a liberal democracy where we can all sit at a table and disagree passionately with one another, but we don't pick up guns, we don't pick up knives, we actually have an argument, and in the ultimate, we have an election where the people can decide who runs it. That's the safe space we all need. Anything else is just censorship and a step backwards.
As I understand it, the LGBT representative of the National Union of Students and others have said the same thing, that speakers who they are no platforming have views which are not only inimical to them, but are transphobic, is the word that's used in this context. Daniel Hannan.
Well, the specific speaker that we were talking about there, Jonathan, was Peter Tatchell, who is, of course, not everyone's cup of tea, but I don't think anyone could deny his courage, not even his severest detractors. This is not somebody who has confined his criticism to softy targets like bishops who are going to always, apologise. He's taken on nasty hate preachers in Muslim countries. He's taken on rappers with homophobic lyrics in the Caribbean. He still carries the injuries from his second attempt to perform a citizen's arrest on Robert Mugabe. And what's his crime? What is it that he's done that is so outrageous? Simply to have called for free speech, to have expressed the view that although he doesn't agree with it, if a Christian baker doesn't want to produce a wedding cake for a same-sex wedding, that's their right. So you see, we've now reached the point with this kind of bizarre competitive virtue signalling, this constant desire to flaunt your piety in more and more recherche ways. We've now reached the point where you get anathematized, not for holding unfashionable opinions, but for allowing somebody else to hold unfashionable opinions. And you really hang your head in wonder. I mean, 100 years ago, 18 and 19-year-old kids were fighting in the trenches in Flanders, in the plains in Mesopotamia, and now people are that worried about hearing an opinion that they're not going to like. For heaven's sake, if you're that easily offended, maybe you shouldn't be at university.
Is there any... Would you in any way modify your judgment of what Fran Cowling did in that case? Because he wasn't, in fact, banned from speaking, although that has happened in other cases. She refused to be on a platform with him because of what she regarded as his views.
So, exactly. So that was actually not an example of no platforming, you're right, and that was misreported in a number of headlines. Nonetheless, the basic principle of saying, I will be contaminated by sharing a stage with somebody who, although he hasn't expressed any opinions with which I really disagree, although he's probably done more than anyone else alive to advance the cause of gay rights, he has spoken in favour of free speech. I mean, just ponder that. Simply to call for free speech is now considered a crime, or at least an obnoxious attitude that gets you banned from sharing a platform with someone. I mean, for heaven's sake, free speech is the essence of all our other freedoms. As soon as people are not able to express themselves on a variety of subjects, we cease to be a pluralist and open society.
Absolutely. And also, if you disagree with somebody, go on a platform with them and argue with them. That's what democracy is all about.
Although the media are currently playing a game, which is if you're a politician and you've been on a platform with someone else that the media then find has said something 5 years before that is pretty obnoxious, they will put that into a headline that you've shared a platform with X and Y, and these are his or her views, in an attempt to try to paint you with the same views. And so there is this game.
Have you got in mind Jeremy Corbyn's views and John McDonnell's views that they've expressed in the past about terrorists? Is that what's in your mind?
I'm thinking about, to be honest, I'm thinking about myself. The Sunday Times did a piece on me because I'd been on a platform 8 years ago with somebody who'd said something 3 years before that, or perhaps 3 years after that, and they're doing it to Sadiq Khan, who's the London Labour mayoral candidate. I mean, it's a game.
So you shrugged it off, I presume?
Yeah, it's a load of nonsense.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Any answers again on that important topic? 03700 100 444 to our next, please.